Welcome to episode 72 of the Epic Classroom Podcast. I'm Trevor, and this is where we explore how to make learning meaningful and dynamic and transformative. Epic, so students don't just get through school, they thrive because of it. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the podcast. I am really excited about this episode because last night I went on a night hike. It was called the Hooten Hike. So I don't know if I've told you this before, but my little boy Jack, he is almost 12 years old. He's in 6th grade and he is obsessed with birding. Like, he loves birds. And this local organization organized this hike last night where everybody met up at this nature preserve, and a bunch of nature enthusiasts went hiking into the woods at night with headlamps on. And a local ecologist led us through the woods, teaching us how to do owl calls so that we could try to find owls at night. And we actually did, by the way. We found a great horned owl hooting up in a tree, and it was awesome. And as I'm hiking along in the dark with my son, and it was just so much fun. I mean, it was also cold. It was like 20 degrees, but we just loved it. I was talking to the ecologist, and his name is Joel, probably still is. I was talking to Joel, and I was asking about his work and what does he do, and he said, well, I'm a big bird enthusiast, but I'm actually an ecologist for the state of Michigan. I was like, oh, tell me about your work. He's like, well, right now I'm working on this big project where we're trying to figure out the impact that agriculture has on fish populations in our rivers. And he was telling me about some of the experiments he does and how he collects this data and how he does all this field work. And ultimately, he's putting together a big proposal to create legislation to protect rivers and fish population and help inform and educate the agricultural community, farmers, on how to develop best practices to save the trout in Michigan. And he was telling me all this, and I was just so fascinated by it because I love fly fishing, and I'm really curious about it. But it was like a light bulb went off for me. He's telling me about a project he's doing, right? Like, he's doing a project for a living. That's what he does, is complete projects. And this reminds me of something I read not too long ago, this survey put on by Upwork that says that 38% of the U.S. workforce does freelance work for a living. So I crunched some numbers. That means about 64 million people they're contract workers, freelance work. They don't work full-time for companies. They work for them on temporary basis, right? Like, or another way of putting it, 64 million people in our country do projects for a living, right? Contractors, they're given a specific problem, they're given stipulations and criteria for solving the problem, and then a deadline to complete it by, right? That's a project. And this number is growing with the advent of artificial intelligence and remote workplaces. More and more people will be engaged in projects on a regular basis. Not to mention the millions of jobs, from engineers to graphic designers to construction managers to ecologists in the state of Michigan, that are also doing project-based work as well. That's project work. And I want you to think about your own life for a moment. Right? Like, I bet even if you don't do projects for a living all the time, I bet you have some type of project going on in your life, or you have recently, right? Like, if you are a homeowner, there's always projects to do. I just spent the last year refinishing my own basement, and that meant doing a lot of research on how to refinish a basement, coming up with supplies and a budget, buying those supplies, learning how to build and create, and I've been doing this whole thing over a year. I have been engaged in my own project, and I've had to do a lot of learning tied to that, right? So when we talk about helping students become future ready, right, like and making them ready and prepared for life post-graduation, the ability to work on projects needs to be prioritized, right? Like, the ability to work with deadlines and solve real problems and do it within a frame of time. They have to learn how to do it, because increasingly that's what work looks like in the modern age, AKA project-based learning is more relevant than ever. Now, I'm not talking about model volcano projects, by the way, right? Like, I think I've talked about this before on the podcast, but let's do it again. Often in school, when we think of projects, they're more like desserts rather than main course, right? Like, think about it like this. Desserts projects, they're like the dessert that comes after a meal. They're fun and nice to have. Everybody loves a good dessert, but they're not essential, right? You don't need the dessert in order to survive. It's nice to have, but like it doesn't provide you with the essential nutrients your body actually needs. That's what the main course does. The main course is the meal you actually need. It's where you get your vitamins and protein and energy and sustenance. And similarly in school, the main course is the learning process where you gain the essential knowledge and skills. And then the project, like a dessert, comes after as a bonus. Right? For example, you might learn about volcanoes and study their structure and eruptions and igneous rock and plate tectonics and impact on the environment. And you do all that through the traditional ways of learning, whether it's direct instruction and reading and watching videos, whatever. But then as a project, you might build a model volcano as a group. Does that sound familiar? Right? Like projects like these are fun and creative, but sometimes they can feel like an add-on rather than an integral part of the learning, right? Like if I never made the model volcano, I still would have learned the same amount about volcanoes. It was a dessert. It wasn't necessary. And that's not what projects actually look like in the real world, right? We don't do dessert projects in life. Or if we do, if we're assigned to do something that doesn't feel meaningful, we usually don't really like that type of work. We resent it, right? We don't want to be given stuff that we just know isn't purposeful. And I bet if you're an educator, you've been given plenty of tasks that lack purpose, that feel like a dessert, that aren't actually contributing to your work, right? And this is probably why one person usually does all the work in a project and everybody else just rides on their coattail, right? Like the A students usually care enough about their grade to do the project, even if it's just a little 5% tag on. But the rest of the group is like, well, this doesn't feel meaningful. I was able to pass the test without having to create this model volcano. I don't need to put in the hard effort of collaboration. And so I'm just not going to do it, right? Because I don't need to do it in order to be successful in this learning unit, right? And so therefore, lots of people do projects in school growing up, but they never actually learn how to successfully be a part of a project and see something through all the way, because quite often projects are desserts rather than main course. If we want to prepare students for real project work, they need to engage in projects that are main course, right? Where the project is there, the problem is present the whole time, right? This means giving students a relevant, authentic problem at the beginning of a learning unit, and then the subsequent teaching and learning is related to solving that problem. For instance, I once invited a city planner from our local municipality to come and talk with my class. And she shared with my students how the city was struggling with complaints from residents about unsafe walking and biking routes, especially around schools and parks. There's just no good way for pedestrians to get around. And she shared about how people want safer crosswalks and clearer signs and better lighting and more accessible pathways. But the city didn't have the staff capacity to study every neighborhood in depth. And so what she just did there is she introduced a relevant problem to my students. And then she asked them if they'd be willing to help analyze specific areas of town and propose design solutions to improve pedestrian safety. And so she showed my students some maps of different neighborhoods and basic city planning guidelines and examples of past proposals, showing them what a good proposal looks like, and then told them that she had this meeting in 3 weeks and she would love it if they could present their recommendations at the meeting to the actual city planning department. And so now the students had a clear objective and deadline. And the only thing they were missing was the knowledge of how this all works, right? Of how urban design and data collection and even persuasive communication actually work. They didn't know how to do that. And so at the beginning of this project, they didn't know how to solve the problem that the city planner gave them. And so that's what our class became for the next month, learning how to analyze traffic patterns and interpret simple data sets and research best practices for pedestrian safety and build evidence-based arguments, right? It was a main course project. The problem was present the whole time. It wasn't something, hey, we're going to learn all about this, how to read data and write persuasively and craft it together, and then I'm going to give you this problem to solve. Instead, the problem was given at the beginning, and that was the driving force to do all of this learning and work afterwards. It was a main course project. The problem was present the entire time. It drove the learning. just like any good project does. I told you I finished my basement. That all started because my basement was a catch-all for all of the stuff my family doesn't use regularly but doesn't want to part with yet, right? Like it's like baby cribs and wakeboards and all these things that just piled up in the basement, and it was a problem because we realized we had all this square footage in our house that wasn't getting used. And so my solution was I need to build a storage room down there so that I can move all of my stuff to it. That was my inciting incident. That was my problem. And then all of the learning and all of the effort and work after that was about solving that problem. It was building to something, right? In the same way with this project, students were introduced to a problem, and then because there's this problem that they felt like they needed to solve, they had to pay attention when we studied ratios and graphing, right? Because they needed to represent traffic data clearly. They had to listen during lessons on persuasive writing because they knew that they were going to have to convince adults that their ideas were worth implementing. They had to evaluate sources carefully when researching safety standards. They had to rely on peer feedback to make sure their proposals were clear and realistic and compelling. And then the presentation day came, and groups presented their proposals to the actual city planner and a small panel from the planning department, and they walked through maps and data and visual mock-ups. They explained their reasoning. They answered follow-up questions from professionals who are actually doing this work for a living. And I'm telling you, my friends, the tone in the room felt different than a typical class presentation. Students weren't asking, is this good enough? They were asking, does this make sense in the real world? Would this actually work? Is this realistic? Can you actually use what I'm giving you? And a few of the planners even told my students that some of their ideas were things the city had already been discussing, and others were ideas they hadn't even considered before. Not every proposal was perfect. None of them magically fixed everything. But every student experienced what it feels like to do work that matters to someone beyond their teacher. And that's what main course project-based learning looks like. Right? The authenticity of the work increased student engagement. And this is why there's loads of research that shows the effectiveness of project-based learning for deeper learning and academic success. I think I might have told you before, but I did a keynote for the AP College Board Conference last year. I'm doing it again this year in Las Vegas. So if you want to come to Vegas and hang out, you let me know. I'll be doing the opening keynote at the AP annual conference this year. And I asked them, why do you want me to talk about this stuff? Right? Like I'm usually talking about breaking the script and obviously still teaching curriculum, but doing it with creativity or finding ways to make things more authentic. And so often when I would think of AP, I'm thinking, oh yeah, there's a very strongly scripted curriculum. This is what you need to cover. This is how you do it. And so I asked, why would you want me to talk about this stuff? And they said, well, we have done a ton of research over the last few years, and we have discovered that students who are doing project-based work in AP classes are actually passing the AP exam at a higher rate. Right? Another way of putting it, the authenticity is making students work harder. Knowing that there is a meaningful problem to solve helps them dig into this rigorous, difficult, advanced placement coursework, right? Like it's a principle that works across the board. People want to know that they can make a difference in the world. And when there's an opportunity to learn in the midst of making that difference, we learn better. Our brains respond to it better, right? Like there is this power in doing authentic work. Students who may not have been eager to learn the content of this unit with the city planner originally were now more eager to do it because of the relevance of it. However, students were also developing an aptitude for authentic work that will serve them in the project-based workplace that they're going to be entering after school. And so this is our call to action. Make learning more authentic. We need to teach students how to collaborate and critically think and communicate and learn information in order to solve real problems. And listen, that doesn't mean getting rid of best practices and ditching the way that you've always taught your students. Instead, it means enhancing learning units with authentic problems, right? Like we can still teach short stories, but instead of writing short stories for the grade book, you're now writing them for an elderly people at a local retirement home, right? There's now an audience for your short stories, but you can still teach short stories using best practices. There still might be some direct instruction. There still might be lots of writing practice and I do, you do, we do. Like we don't have to throw the baby out with the bathwater, but now there's something bigger driving the work, right? Instead of writing here's another, rather than just learning about maps, because they're in the content standards, right? Like maybe you're a second grade teacher. Instead of just learning about maps because they're in the standards, you're learning about them so you can create your own map to help new students find their way in the school, right? It's a relevant problem to second graders, and now you're going to do something about that problem with the content of class. You're still teaching your short story or your map, doing it the way you know best, only now there's a purposeful motivator. There's a problem to solve. There's a project, and students need to learn how to work on projects. All right, so that's what I wanted to share with you this week. I know I've talked about it before, but I think that you can't talk about it enough. So thanks for digging in. If you want to dig even deeper into project-based learning, there are a few ways to do that. I have an online course called the Project-Based Learning Masterclass, where I go through all of the principles of designing and managing and leading really strong projects. So you can check that out at my website, epicpbl.com. I'm also holding, I don't know if you're in the Midwest or even in Michigan, but I am holding a project-based learning workshop, a full-day experience here in Ada where I live, where I'm going to be with a small group of teachers, and we're just going to dive into planning and leading awesome projects. It's going to be a really fun day. It's here in Ada. If you want to learn more about that, you can go to trevormuir.com/PBL-workshop. trevormuir.com/PBL workshop, where you can learn more. It's going to be a really cool day, and there are just a few spots left. So if you want to get registered for that, join me. Also, my book, The Epic Classroom, really lays out the process on how to do this. The Collaborative Classroom is about managing collaborative projects. The New Teacher Mindset, my third book, is all about the mindset that goes into this type of learning. And so check out any of those, or just keep listening to the podcast, because I'm sure we'll talk about it more. Next week on the podcast, I cannot wait for you to hear that episode. I'm interviewing, you know what? It's just going to be a big surprise. I can't wait. So check out next week's episode. Thank you, everybody, for listening to the Epic Classroom Podcast. My name's Trevor Muir, and I will talk to you next time.